welcome back to another episode of
Just
a Squirrel looking for a nut,
trying to get out of this
rut.
Okay, so we only got a couple of words off this time. That's still improvement. By the time 10 years or so go by, maybe we'll have ourselves together.
We'll be playing the recordings over again.
Exactly.
Sure we got the intro right.
So, hello everybody. It is good to be back here. I missed everyone in the audience last week, but I heard and I listened to the show, and it was incredible, and it's gotten wonderful feedback. So, congratulations on that, Oleg.
Yeah, Nancy and Casey were actually exceptional.
They are superstars, and we're gonna have to have them back. Now, I'm going to start by going personal today. What will seem like a little bit of self-promotion is, but really it's not. It's for a purpose. So as some of you all may or may not know, today there was a book that was released that I was contributing author to. It's called Guts, Grit, and the Grind, and it's a men's mechanic's guide to mental health. The reason why I mention that is because I let my co-host Oleg know about that in advance. He did some advanced review of parts of it, and I also told him when it would be coming out. And to my surprise, earlier today, I saw on his social media channels not only a standard blah, boring sort of a promotional piece for this book, but really a touching, genuinely affecting, and vulnerable post about friendship. So before we go any further, I want to say for the world to hear that what you said, that you took the time to do, Oleg, was an act of friendship, and it deeply affected me. People don't do that all the time in this world. I know that. I haven't always had that, so I appreciate it. Our topic today is how, why, what causes us to pick our friends? What causes those who are in our circle to be there? You and I have talked about before, and you mentioned in that very moving post, a year or so ago, when you and I had our first conversation, and as you mentioned, it was an hour and a half long, note page after note page after note page. And as is common lore now, you said at the end of the conversation that we had just happened upon, due to an introduction by a wonderful person that we both would call friend, I would say Leah Frankel. Yeah. She certainly changed our lives. You said, I have a feeling we will be in each other's lives for a long time. And I felt that too, and I acknowledged as much. Many times after intro calls, I'm thinking, okay, that was neutral. Sometimes I'm thinking that was wonderful. I want to see them again. And sometimes I'm running for my life. And David's looking at me, my husband, saying, God, when will that call end? That didn't happen here.
Yeah.
But it's easy for good feelings to be that, to waft away. It's easy for us to get caught up in the day-to-day and not choose to build a relationship. We've done that. We chose to walk a path together, and here we are, regularly walking a path together as friends. During the past year, I know I am not alone in understanding that those I've chosen to walk with as friends have been people like you that might be different from those who I've chosen before. And there have been those whose paths have separated from mine. And I'm not walking with them anymore. They've, to some extent, sometimes they have chosen to not have me as their friend. That's the part that hurts. I've chosen to not have them as friends. And sometimes I don't know if a conscious choice was involved, but we just haven't connected. When you view, and this is not just to Oleg, but it's to everyone. When did you decide in your mind that you and I were friends as opposed to just networking partners or someone that we'd spoken on the phone to, or an acquaintance. And what was the threshold that was crossed to have that happen?
So I think for me, and before I say that, I do appreciate our friendship, Scott, because I feel like there's a lot of value, there's a lot of mutual understanding, and more importantly, I think there's a lot of transformation rather than transaction that takes place within our particular connection.
Was that a shout out to Nancy John?
It was a shout out to Nancy John from last week's episode. But the thing that you mentioned, it's an interesting question as far as when did it go from one side to the other or whatever other side. And I think what ended up happening for me was it happened during that conversation. There was a moment, in fact, there was a handful of moments I remember that stood out to me in particular. And those moments had to do with your drive, or at least how you illustrated what it means to be driven through a phone conversation. Now, we also have to understand that you and I, we've never met each other outside of Zoom or any sort of stream, broadcast, live, everything that we're doing. We've never had an in-person conversation, not yet. So I think that's a lot to be said as far as choosing to be friends with someone who you haven't had that personal physical interaction with. But I think the things that stood out to me in particular were your drive, your ability to kind of shoot for the stars and land on the moon mindset. And that's just going after a goal or a target and knowing that it's going to have its own course, but finding other people who can align with you and support you along the way is important. And I think it was from those early moments, those were the things that really allowed me to understand that you are someone I'll probably stay in touch with in some way, shape, or form. But I will also add on to it. It was a decision I had to make. It was a decision I had to make of actively committing to forming a connection over whatever the time frame is. And then I think on top of that, there's also a component that once you know, you know. And I don't know how to explain that besides the fact that you and I had a conversation. I've had a similar conversation with Casey Berman. I've had a similar conversation with Nicole Ash. I've had a similar conversation with Thomas. I'm not going to butcher his last name again. I've done that too many times. But those are a handful of individuals that I've had hours upon hours like conversations where almost instantaneously I knew that these are the people I'm going to be connected with and to for however long, which I think to me speaks to the deeper point of what does a friendship even mean and what does it mean to be a friend and how do you know if someone is a friend to begin with? And that I think goes to acceptance. Being able to accept the other person for who they are without having a specific expectation of how they need to be.
How do you know if you like someone or not, though? Don't you have to actually be able to tolerate being in their presence?
Yes, I think that goes to energy. I think that goes to understanding their energy. I think that goes to understanding where they are at the particular chapter of their life. And that also goes to similarities. So you and I just happened to meet at a time where both of us were doing a deep dive into the growth, into the mindset, into relationship building, into development of our businesses. And we also happen to be in similar industries. So I think there were so many things that were similar across the board where it would actually take me a lot of time and energy to try and figure out things that I didn't like about the connection. So that's where I realized that the similarities outweighed the differences.
When you meet someone, and this is very much to the audience too. Oh, I vanished.
Right.
Here I am again. I don't know what that was about, but okay. I'm glad to be back. So what do you, when you pick friends or when you decide who to build a friendship with, or at least attempt to build a friendship with, do you tend to default to liking people? or disliking them, or is it somewhat neutral?
So
how fast do you make that judgment too, by the way?
In the moment. I don't do the whole. So I use the experience to demonstrate certain things that they tell me that they are. For example, if you're telling me that you are committed and you follow through on things, I will let the experience, the lived experience, judge those things, because words are just words when it comes to action-oriented approaches. Now, how fast do I make the call of whether or not I align with the person or not? It's in the moment. It's in the moment. It goes from the energy, or it goes from their presence. It goes from the vibration of their voice. It goes from the alignment of their thoughts. So if it happens to be, for example, if you and I are having a conversation and all we are doing is arguing, and we're not even having an argument
That's
like
fun.
Agree to disagree or just something to be fun, but more so just like genuinely arguing, wanting to prove the other person wrong so you can gain power position and be the right one in that friendship or connection. That to me is not great alignment. I don't enjoy being part of situations like that. Now, Nancy John also brought up a really good perspective that I've been focusing on ever since, which goes to another topic down the road, and that's what you choose to focus on expands. Where you put your attention, it does expand. So last week when she was on this show and she was talking about this whole concept that relationships are either transactional or transformational. Well, I took that statement to heart, and I've started to look at all of my relationships through that particular lens. Mm-hmm. Now, I do believe there's a combination of both. I do believe that even in the transformative relationships, there are transactional behaviors. Mm-hmm. But I also do believe that in transformative relationships, the transformative part outweighs the transactional. Mm-hmm. And so I found myself, and I've had 2 instances like that in the past, I don't know, a week, longer than that, where I had to make decisions to not be, quote unquote, friends with certain people because I felt that I was being too much in a transactional relationship.
When you're not friends with people like that anymore, when they're demoted, let's put it business terms, when they've got that demotion and then kicked down the ladder a little bit, what sort of relationship do you have with them? Do you banish them, or are they just in a little smaller box?
I let it go. I let it go for what it is. I don't choose to completely close my door to that particular person or connection, because I do believe that sometimes people come back into your life for other purpose, other reasons. And I'm not going to try and control this particular instance and say that, okay, I have to close the door forever. There's one other key component that another friend of mine, David Hennessy, had really helped me see this. Never looked at it in this way before, and that is, he said, never make a decision when you're angry.
Yeah.
So
which is so hard.
It's very difficult. It was very difficult for me to observe a relationship and look at it through the lens of this is solely transactional, and then feeling a little bit of overwhelm, frustration, and anger in that moment, but still choosing to not completely shut the door, but rather process it through the lens of like, this relationship served me to get to this particular chapter, and I served this relationship as well. But moving forward, I no longer serve it because I'm in a different headspace when it comes to it.
Do you believe then that even a transformational relationship is in a way transactional, because the transaction that you want from the relationship is one that generates the transformation?
Transformation, yeah. That's a good question. So I think for me, I look at transformational relationship differently, and I would be curious to hear your approach to this. I personally don't expect anyone to ever transform me or to change me in any way. However, I do try to actively engage in groups and settings where I'm able to get a different perspective, different way of thinking, different way of learning. So when I have conversations with you, or when I have conversations with Casey, or the combination of the three of us, or whoever else that's involved, I don't have an expectation that Scott must say this, Casey must say that, and if they don't, cancel. I don't approach those conversations through that way.
Cancel culture in Oleg's world is very extreme, sudden, and guillotine sharp. I was wondering why my head was rolling down the hill the other day.
But rather, I will tell you how I do approach it. I approach it through the lens of, this is a space where there lies a possibility of me developing a new perspective and shifting a new perspective. And once I started focusing on the fact that it's possible to develop a new perspective walking out of a conversation, 100% of the time, every step of the time, I've always walked away with a new perspective. Mm-hmm. Always. There has not been a time where I can't say that I didn't walk away with a new perspective. And that's because I think, and this is something you pointed out however long ago, like once your antenna is up, you're bound to attract those things.
Yeah, you see them.
Yeah, you see them in places where they were not seen before. So long story longer, I don't have a specific expectation for you guys, especially those that are closest to me. It's more so I choose to look at it as, this is a conversation through which I can find a different way of looking at life, or even better understand myself through understanding who you are. I think one of the other beauties, and I would love to hear from you, Scott, as far as how you look at relationships when it comes to that. One of the other beauties within not only our friendship, but my friendship with so many of my other, not so many, but a handful of other people that I'm really close to, is that we don't have an expectation. Yeah. You know, I understand that the value I bring to your world is different compared to the value that you bring into my world. Mm-hmm. So I don't operate through the lens, and I'm not saying this is a wrong or right, it just is. Like, I don't choose to operate through the lens of me sending you things and expecting a certain sentence or two or whatever in response. That's just not me. I don't, and once again, I'm not saying that's the wrong way of doing it. I'm just saying that it's a different way. So I don't choose to do that. Rather, like if I were to send you something, I'm looking to improve. So my question would be, and I'm sure you can attest to that through the lived experience, like I would just ask, could you give me some feedback? Or what do you think? What are your thoughts? How could you make this better? Or go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's interesting though, because what you're raising is around the role of expectations in friendships. Yeah. And to what extent we have them or don't, or what those expectations are like. Now, I will say there are some expectations I have in friendships.
Yeah.
I will. First of all, don't be an asshole all the time. Don't be someone all the time. We all are assholes sometimes. I'm an Aries. I have had my asshole moments, as sweet, tender, and innocent as I know I appear. Caught in a bad day, I can be a little bit of just a little one.
Right.
But so I ask to be forgiven for assholishness, and I forgive people when they're assholes too. Sometimes, if that's a default behavior. Also, reciprocity. I generally don't. I'm not counting tit for tat.
Yes.
I'm too busy for that. I don't have time for it. I do think it demeans the relationship. I believe in, if I want to be a friend, be a friend. If I want love, give love. If I want a nice book review, well, I should be doing something nice for you too. I do think that after a while, if there's no reciprocity at all in the friendship, I will not give endlessly. There were people, for instance, who I would call all the time, and they would happily get together with me and hang out. But then I realized if I wasn't calling them over a period of years, I wouldn't hear from them. Or if I canceled, they didn't seem to care. Or if I were sick or something happened, it didn't seem to matter. And that is the sort of baseline reciprocity that I expect. What I have not analyzed, I don't know if I will analyze, but I would analyze if I had the time, energy to really think about it, and maybe I will now, is where do I draw that baseline? When do I say enough is enough? You need to show a little respect back. And then when I get some of that respect back, we can talk about having a friendship. I have thrown connections your way. You've thrown connections my way. You wrote that lovely social media piece about me today. I've supported things that you have done in my own way. All of that. And we've had good times together, and we've been honest with each other about work product that we've done or feeling states that we've had, all those sorts of things. But I would hope that after a while, if I was only taken and you were only given, not only would I hope for your sake that you would say enough is enough, but I would hope for my sake too. Because at the end of the day, if I have a relationship with someone where I'm always demeaning them or I'm not giving, it means on some level I'm engaging in a relationship with someone that I don't have respect for. And what does that say about my respect for myself if I'm tolerating that for me? I don't want to be having friendships that are pity friendships. So that's the one thing I will say about expectations. I do view you only give me if I give you as small-minded, transactional, and utterly non-transformational. And I will say this, that the friendships that I've considered the most impactful, even if they've passed, have been those that have in one way or another transformed my life. Some of the people that have been on these shows with us, who have commented in the comments, have changed my life with their statements. My ways of thinking. My husband has utterly transformed my life, and I like to think I've transformed his too. You've done that with me. Friendship, I do think, is one that many people would define, at least I would, thinking about it, as having that impact where they have changed you, elevated you, or brought out something for the better. But can you be friends with someone? Let's say our friendship was based just on gossip. Would that be a friendship? I guess maybe we would be transformed by gossip, but is that the sort of transformation that you would view as a hallmark of a real friend? What about people who you work with for 20 years and you're gossiping about work for 20 years and you go together for lunch every day and you hang out and call each other because so-and-so boss was having an affair with blah, 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 and they're your close friends? What is that?
So I think that could still be a form of friendship. I think there are different forms of friendship. The friendship that I look for may be different from someone else's, but by no means my friendship is any better than anyone else's. So whether that means gossip or whatever it is, that's the connecting point that they experience, or that's the friendship that they go. And I think the reason why I look at it through that lens is because I once did that myself. In my opinion, I think many of us have done that before. Not necessarily gossip about a boss, but gossip about some other individual in life.
Or you know.
Exactly.
Celebrities.
So I think those things happen. The thing that you pointed out about a level of expectation and contact, I was having a conversation like this with another friend of mine earlier today, and we were talking about this whole concept of being a connector. And he had said this thing that I've never even looked upon through this particular lens before. And that is, he said, based on his own experience, the fact that he's been a connector for however many years by now, one of the things that it has led him as far as a set of behaviors is that in being a connector, he has always been the one that initiates the conversation. So he has always been the one that makes that first phone call. He's always been the one that continues to make those phone calls to other people. Now, I asked him the question, I said, don't you ever get frustrated or overwhelmed or tired of making that phone call, however many years down the road? But that goes back to an assumption that I make, and that is the other person values frequency the same exact way that I do. Or maybe it just happens to be so that by doing this behavior, however many months or years continuously, and that's always me choosing to call that person, maybe I have trained that person that I will be the one that's always making that initial contact.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it gets more complicated. And for me, how do you solve that? How do you get around it? I think that goes to honesty. I think that goes to being fully transparent in any form of connection, something that I'm trying to do. And I don't always get it right every time, but I'm trying to do it more than ever before. And that's if you and I have some sort of conflict in a connection, or if I feel like I'm the one that's always making a phone call and it's bothering me, I think it's my responsibility to say, hey, Scott, I've been calling you for the past year, and I feel like I'm the only one that is calling you, therefore cares about preserving this friendship. How do you feel?
I was in a situation with someone that I knew online many years ago. I met him through a music group that I was part of online. And he and I had shared musical connections, and we loved to trade rare music back and forth, and we had good senses of humor. He was very smart. He, though, eventually felt comfortable enough with me. I believed that he viewed me as a friend, and I viewed him as a friend too, enough to reveal that he had had a significant physical issue that led to a deformity on his body that he had extreme sensitivity around, and that he felt such sensitivity around that he was not sure he would ever be able to connect with someone permanently as a love partner because of this. And he shared that with me through email. I happened to have gone out that night with some friends, so I didn't come home till really late. When I got home, there was a whole train of emails from him. How come you're rejecting? Right, there is basically expressions of fear that I rejected him. How come you haven't responded more quickly? Which calmed down a little bit once he knew I'd been gone the whole time, and I wanted him to understand that he was safe having shared this with me. However, I noticed that the relationship changed afterwards. He was very, in my opinion, guarded, very much assuming that I would turn on him, very much seeing sinister motives behind things that I would do. I chalked it up to him having become very vulnerable, having revealed this really tragic thing to me and not having felt safe about it. So, of course, I had compassion. However, he, on one of these forums, one day just asked a random question of everyone, and I made a comment and then moved on. And he said, you disagreed with me about this. You didn't know this, but this was a test of our friendship. And the fact is, you didn't answer this the way I wanted it to be answered. Do not ever contact me again.
Yes.
So I was like, whoa, okay. That was quick.
Yeah.
And true to form, I emailed him back. He never responded to me again. I would see him post online. Sometimes I would respond to his posts. He would block me or whatever. And the question was not anything. It was whether or how I felt about some music producer working with a singer. It was innocuous, in my opinion, like that. And so the question goes as to whether a friendship existed at all. Susan Guiney, it is so good to see you. Thank you for coming back to your show, back to this show. You are a superstar, as people who are regulars on the show may know. Susan Guiney is a executive coach, leadership coach. She's really, really smart, and I love, Susan, your insights on anything that you hear tonight. Oleg, Susan, anyone else? What are your thoughts hearing that story? Did we ever have a friendship?
So hard to say just from that brief story that you shared, but I will also say that it goes back to expectations, right? him having a certain expectation of you wanted to say certain things. I've shared with you recently, I've had a similar thing like that, where someone had shared with me certain things and was expecting a certain thing in return. Now, because I don't operate from that lens, and I actually remember having this conversation with the individual afterwards, where I literally had to end the friendship over the phone call, because I just literally said that we were no longer serving each other's presence. And in that moment, I realized that there is, in my opinion, I think it takes a lot of courage to really approach the question of, is this serving me? It takes a lot of courage to be able to look at a situation and ask that question. Is this friendship serving me? Is this business serving me? Is this version of life serving me?
Do they savor your flavor?
Do they? Exactly.
Good to see you, Kenneth.
And I think in that moment, I just realized that same applies to friendships, and what you just described, it's having an expectation of the person responding in a certain way. And I think that there might be room for expectations and assumptions, but I will also say this, that with expectations and assumptions, how can one truly be who they are and accepted for who they are? So if I have a certain of expectations for you, or for Susan, or for Caleb, or for Kenneth, as far as how they need to react with me or interact with me, am I putting them in the box?
Oh, what about abuse?
Same exact thing. That's probably.
So are you saying that you should not have an expectation that people don't abuse you?
No, no, no.
I'm just saying, I'm dense.
No, I think that's different though. I don't think that's an expectation. I think that goes to tolerance. I think that's understanding how, for example, if I'm in an abusive situation or relationship, and the abuse doesn't only have to be physical abuse. I think abuse also comes from emotional abuse, mental abuse. That's also a thing. I've experienced that, as well as I'm sure I've been on the other end of that. I'm sure that I have, quote unquote, abused some form of connection before. Not choosing to respond to someone else could also be viewed as a form of abuse. So I think it's more for me, like, yes, you could, that's why I was saying the expectation and assumption, they do play a role, but for me, it can't be the only thing that the relationship is based on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kenny has some pretty definitive feelings about abuse in friendships, and I respect that. I'll make sure I never mess around with you, Kenny. Susan Guiney points out something that is really interesting. And I see that Caleb is in the house, by the way. Susan Guiney and Caleb, I may have to think about it. You all might want to connect with each other sometime. I think you all would have a lot to talk about. But be that as it may, Susan points out that she says, as I'm reading this, Susan, I'm taking it as you're saying, I thought I had a friendship, or I might have had a friendship with him, but he didn't have one with me, or what my perception of this friendship was different than what it actually was. If, as you said, he probably had created a narrative of people rejecting him, and then created a situation that fulfilled that prophecy. And so is it possible for a friendship to be one-sided? That's a good point. A good question.
So here's another question, and I don't know if you've experienced this, Scott, or if Susan or Caleb or Kenny have experienced any of this. What about situations that you feel like you can't exit? So family, close connections.
You can't exit your family.
How do you manage relationships that you feel like you can't exit? And on top of that, do you feel like there is a relationship that you can't exit in this life, in your life?
So
let's start at square one and then we'll build it up.
Yes. I'll illustrate the latter with a story.
Sure.
And I actually would in particular be curious to hear what Susan has to say about this. for reasons that I'm sure she'll make clear if she has remarks. Oh my God. Richard Cook is in the house. What platform are the others watching you on? LinkedIn. That's where our mutual friend Susan Guiney is, by the way. Richard, good to see you. I want to start seeing you on Monday nights again, too. So let's just say this. It's easy to get out of, I think, relatively easy to get out of French, just pure social acquaintances. You just stop calling them, and you're a hostage to your own expectations. The story I'm going to say is about a woman that I worked with many years ago. She was having problems finding a man, and Oleg, she wanted a man. And she said, well, he has to be of my ethnicity. He has to be of an age group. He has to have a professional status of one that I agree with of a certain level. He has to have a certain faith. He has to have all this criteria. And I said, you're never going to get anybody. Who are these people? And then she said, well, my family demands this of my friends, of those I date. And so that's how I'm going to go. And so then a third friend or another friend of ours says, Scott, don't you understand? She just can't escape her family. If her family wants her to do this, she has to do it. And I said, excuse me, I'm gay. You think my family wanted me to be married to a man? I still did it. And my relationship with my parents over many years has been strained because they find and have found my sexual orientation to be unacceptable. And so my position on that with them, and I've been clear, has been that you want a relationship with me, you don't have to have one. If you don't like the fact that I've got a husband, you're free to walk. If you cannot tolerate this and will not tolerate this, and they have not been this way, but if they were to actually be verbally abusive to my husband or anything like that, in a hot second, I would walk from that relationship. Parental relationships, particularly extreme situations where there's been child abuse or even just toxic family dynamics. I think that it can be easy for a child to terminate and walk away from that relationship. And familial ties are very, very strong. The one I honestly don't know an answer to is, because I've never been to that and probably never will be, is the parental relationship. Children, not all the time, but children do divorce their parents. How often and can a parent ever walk away from their child? The only time I've ever heard of that, and this is a limitation on my end, has been situations in which a child has committed an extreme crime. And I have seen on the news situations like, I'll never forget this one time, there was a man who was a serial killer and was up for the death penalty in the South somewhere. And they interviewed his father and his mother, and the reporter said, are you grieving over the loss of your son? And the father said, no, I'd hang him too. And so clearly the parent had severed the relationship with the child there. But even in other situations, that's not necessarily true. Like the Columbine killers, those high school mass murderers, I got the impression from what I know of that their parents didn't just sever the relationship. So even that's something that to me may be a very, very extreme. That may be the one area where I just don't know whether in some cases, yes, the choice is always there, but is that really that parental tie so primal that it's next to impossible to get beyond? Any thoughts from the audience about that one?
Well, here's how I approach it, and I'm somewhat similar thought as it comes to what Caleb just mentioned here, and that's even family members can be the most toxic and negative influencers, impactors, and degenerating people in their lives. So I think it's interesting because I think family, I don't know if we've had this conversation before or not, but family carries this interesting title, right? It's like everyone who's, so I'll share with you my perspective, because I've been able to experience, as you have, Scott, and maybe anyone else that's listening, like two aspects of what family may look like. Being born into a biological set and then being adopted into one. What I think the adoption has helped me see differently is that it helped me understand family through the lens of being able to look at each one of the labels for what it is.
Yeah.
So not taking the label of mom, dad, brother, sister, whoever else for what they are, but really looking at them through the lens of what does it mean to be a mom? What does it mean to have a dad? What does it mean to have a brother? And I think, in my opinion, as I even reflect upon my whole quote unquote family, internal and external, there are people within those circles that to me are really no different than strangers that I meet. Mm-hmm. It just happens to be so that we cross paths once or twice a year over Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever else. And I don't mean this to be in disrespect by any means, but more so just an honest acknowledgement of what our interaction is. But yet, there is still an expectation that carries with it. And that is, if anyone in my family were to be threatened, and would I dodge a bullet for everyone in my family? Honest truth is, I don't know. Probably not. Because I don't have that connection with everyone in my family. So I think there's just some, and I don't know where this comes from. I don't know if it's like the societal expectation that kind of like whatever's said in your household stays in your household. Everyone that's blood related, they're all family, the people you have to respect and stuff like that. But I'm personally like, I don't know how I feel about it because I don't feel the same exact way. And I think to a degree, it's okay to feel like that. You agree? Like it's okay to feel that just because they're family doesn't mean that I have to treat them any differently than, like, if I don't know you, I don't know you. Why am I going to pretend like we're somehow connected when really we aren't?
Yeah. First of all, I'd want to say hello to DJ. Welcome to the conversation. And I'm glad to see that you're loving it. And then, Susan, I do want to acknowledge your contribution, which is acknowledging, I guess, kind of the truth of what I said about parents throwing up their hands sometimes. So there is a severability in that relationship, even under the most extreme circumstances. So thank you so much for that. I will be honest with everyone about this. I'm adopted, just like you, Oleg.
Yeah.
And so the lens through which I see that is distorted by it. I believe it's at least possibly distorted by it. On the other hand, maybe it's perfectly clear. Maybe it's clear in a different way because of that. I feel no connection whatsoever with my biological parents. So I cannot say that to me, in theory, if there had been time for my biological parents and myself to connect before she gave me up for adoption. And I'm not saying that in sort of a victim-y sort of way, because she did what she had to do and I respect her for it, and she did it as an act of love. But if there had been a time, if our histories had been different and we'd had that bond, maybe I would feel different about, well, is this any different than just any other relationship that's out in the world? Whereas in our case, the families that raised us, it truly is something that's artificial. The love that we received or didn't receive, or the environment, the definition of what a family is all impacted by the fact that it's a social construction, it's a legal construction. And there are different, when we were talking earlier about expectations, there are different expectations. Now, my cousins, all of whom were raised by the woman who gave birth to them, sometimes heard the famous words from their mother. I brought you in this world, I can take you out. My mother would never say something like that, nor could she. But I have heard of situations in which the artificial nature of an adoptive family has been pointed out by parents who have said, I wish I'd never adopted you, or I shouldn't have adopted you. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case and that sort of thing is going on, of course the child is going to view the bond as a family as not necessarily any more sacred. The issues of in the LGBTQ plus community, which fortunately it seems to be getting better, but it's still out there, around rejection, by familial people also brings that into relief. I used to do counts of street homeless people for the city of New York every February, some late night when it was a zillion degrees below zero outside. And the two reliable groups you would see that would, when you come up to them on the street and say, do you have a home? They would say yes or no. If they said no, men who were clearly had some sort of drug issue, sometimes women too, but mostly men. Maybe they had prison in their background, and people that were transgendered. They were homeless because their parents kicked them out. And of course, when that happens, again, those parents may have given birth to them and loved them conditionally, but that the artificiality or the hypocrisy behind the warm and fuzzy that we put family into was exposed as a lie.
Do you think a set of expectations when it comes to a friendship come from a void that is needing to be filled?
DJ, candor, authenticity, courage are beautiful things. Thank you tonight.
As I was thinking about this, and I think this, I think it goes directly to DJ's point. Seeking some of these things, such as the situation that I described, that I've experienced, where the person had sent me some things and expected certain words in return. I wonder if that comes from a void, whether it's in the far, far past or a distant past, that needs to be filled, and that's where those words fill it because they provide that service. I wonder if that's one of the things.
Well, do friendships also then fill that void?
Depending on the level of connection, to a degree, yeah. I think if I'm able to fully open up and be accepted by the individual, it might fill the void of not having a sense of belonging or identity in the previous years. Yeah.
Do you know people who have never had a friend? What do you think of those people? And I say this for the audience too. What if I were to tell you I've never had a friend?
I would question whether or not it's possible to not have a friend and still be alive. I think, in my opinion, once again, I don't know of anyone who doesn't have a friend. Now, the definition behind a friend probably varies. You might define a friend differently than DJ or Susan or Kenny or Caleb or I do. But in concept, I would find it very difficult to believe that someone doesn't have a friend and yet still continues to live. Because in my opinion, I think a friendship or a form of human connection, such as the one a true friend is able to provide, once again, in my opinion, I think it's almost essential. It's like it's almost essential to existence.
If I were to sincerely tell you, or you were to observe in my life, that I had no friends, but I otherwise seemed normal, what would you think of me? Would you think there was something wrong with me?
No. And the reason why is because I've been in situations where I didn't feel like I had many friends. So I would look at it more so through the lens of that. You're also asking me now in knowing what I know, not hypotheticals, but I would approach it through the lens of you're on your own journey. And I think I would almost have to believe the fact that if you're looking for friends, you'll find it. However long it takes, I can't tell you that. For you, it might take years upon years upon years. for me might take days, hours. I don't know. I think everyone's on their own journey. But I personally speaking right now, I wouldn't try and judge. In fact, I think if anything, I would probably try and be your friend. But that, I think, would come from feeling sorry, feeling some sort of, I don't know, form of pity, maybe.
What if it was not merely that I didn't have friends? What if it was a little step beyond? What if it was that everyone hated me?
Well, what's the proper way to respond to this?
So I'll give you time to think about it by telling a story. One place that I worked, there was a woman who was universally hated. I don't think that's an over-exaggeration. And there was a team meeting. It was winter. She slipped on the ice and apparently hit her head on the driveway, cracked her skull open, had to go to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And the CEO of the company announced that she was sick because of this and would be out for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And around that room, which was not just one or two people,
right,
there was dead silence. And dead silence and dead silence. And then he said, y'all are cold-blooded. Doesn't anyone feel bad? Dead silence. People just looked. Then he said, she's in the hospital. Are you concerned? Continued dead silence. Finally, someone said, we hope she gets better, just to shut him up. But, it goes as to this person didn't just have no friends. People hated her.
Well, but in that, would you say that's a personal reflection, though? Even though she might have done certain actions that made whoever feel that way, is hate a personal reflection of what you feel internally?
Well, yes, it almost certainly is. However, it's evidence, perhaps, that it wasn't just a situation where she didn't have any friends because she was awkward or because she was different. She certainly was different, mm-hmm. but in a way that was not just a matter of humans being judgmental towards someone because let's say they're somewhere on the non-neurotypical spectrum, or they are of a different race or a different gender, or they have a physical abnormality or something like that. It's a situation where not having a friend is at least arguably, indisputably, because of her own behavior. After all, perhaps one could say, as they would say about songs by the band Journey in the 1980s, 60 million Americans can't be wrong. That many people are buying their records. How bad can the music really be?
Yeah. Well, let's not go down that rabbit hole because, we can slip slowly into the politics, and that's a whole other conversation here that could take place. But I want to touch upon Richard's point here, which actually goes to the exact topic that you just described. What about a friend in your head? A small voice. Does that count?
Richard Cook.
Can you be friends with your inner voice? Is that enough?
Yeah, I love Richard Cook. I'm trying to get away from that word.
I talk to my inner voice. I talk to my inner self all the time.
I can't do that.
Why?
Some people can. Well, maybe I can, but I feel like I'm deluding myself. To me, that inner voice is just me. I've heard you can be friends with yourself. I'll be friends with myself. All that sort of stuff. Companionship is not just me being friends with myself. To me, that's just being alone and talking out loud. What are you people talking about? And that's the sort of stuff that to me is flaky, sort of self-help mumbo jumbo. Sort of like if I have to, I can do anything. You cannot do anything. You can't fly to the moon without oxygen. So don't say that. To have a friend, you need to be a friend, Kenny says. Brother, you got that right. Jessica says she can see how much I'm holding back. Well, Jessica, thanks to you, I'm letting it rip.
That's so funny.
So no, I don't believe it. I'm talking to me. But Richard, I will say, is a serious intellect, and he's a very, very smart and gifted person. So as much as I'm going off on a tangent here, maybe that's because he provoked something inside, or maybe he got my inner voice going louder than it needed to. So that's just me. I would be curious to hear what folks in the audience say. Oleg is crying. Are we friends still?
Yeah.
Well, Richard does, right? Richard, see, that's why, thank you, Richard. Love having you in these conversations, because that last point of yours, right? Like, what can I say to that?
Yeah. I think Viktor Frankl, actually, I don't want to put words into his mouth. Have you read that book? Or has anyone read that book?
Les Mis? Oh, wait, what is it?
Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, I haven't read that in years, and I don't remember it.
So I think he talks about like being able to find companionship and some of the other things that a friendship represents in some of those dire times, when they were in concentration camps and everything. Also looking at certain situations and being able to find humor. But I'll speak to the point of having that inner friend. And I think like partially I agree with what you were saying, Scott, as far as being looked upon a certain way. But at the same time, I will also challenge that, because I think there's a lot of, in my opinion, there's a lot of wisdom that has come from me in being able to have that inner dialogue with my friend, or whichever way you want to look at it.
Or yourself.
Because it gives me a chance to process, though. It gives me a chance to process. Now, I will also say that, in my opinion, much of the outer world, it doesn't accept that level of self-talk. You're viewed as something is wrong with you, or something that needs to be fixed, when the reality of the matter is, for me, I choose to talk certain things out loud in order to process them through. And I think that's how certain ideas are formed, especially around some of these more complex topics. Now, I think there is a difference, though, between relying on self in order to provide some of these things like companionship, or I don't know, like other ways that a friendship can value and benefit you. But at the same time, it also brings a really good question, though, as far as, okay, if we think that that yourself can't be your friend, give me some examples that yourself can't provide for. You've made yourself laugh before. You've made yourself cry before. You've made yourself think before. You've made yourself do certain things before. So what is it that your inner self is not able to provide that a outside friend is?
I think that's what Jessica's talking about in her last comment, interestingly enough. It probably isn't the same. I hope to never be in one of those situations like the volleyball that Tom Hanks had, where you lost on an island, or like John McCain had when he was imprisoned in Hanoi, or other extreme situations, war criminals, or POWs, or things like that, where people in isolation cells or solitary for huge amounts of time. Yeah.
I didn't know that about Tom Hanks. He had a basketball?
Wasn't it the movie Castaway, Richard, where that happened? I haven't seen that movie, but I want to say, maybe it was a volleyball. I don't remember. Or maybe
Jessica brings up a good, interesting point, though. External perspective. I'm assuming that's what she means by what a friend is able to provide. But then at the same time, external perspective. I mean, do you really need a friend to provide that, or can it be anyone? He says yes.
Oh, thank you, Richard.
Oh, he says it's a volleyball.
Hey, it's big and round. What can we say? And Kenny, you busted me out for being loud.
What do you think's the difference though between a friend and a colleague then?
Well, transformational versus
transactional.
Transactional is to me that. To me, a colleague is mostly two things. It can be transactional. It can be elevated into transformational on purely a professional level. Personal, it begins to feel to me more like an actual friendship. Colleague, though, also implies a level of distance and respect. You do occasionally hear, or I've occasionally heard people referred to as a friend and a colleague, which is to me indicating that on a language level and a cultural level, there's some ability to distinguish the two, that they can overlap, but they're not necessarily the same. Work people, work acquaintances or work relationships, I tend to address as colleagues to sort of keep those boundaries in place. Which reminds me, how do y'all feel about friends at work? Jessica, Richard, DJ, Susan, Kenny,
Caleb,
do you all have friends at work? Real friends?
I will
argue. Oh, go ahead.
How do you look at Facebook friends then? At least the ones that you don't stay in touch with. Are they friends? Why did Facebook come with that concept? Like, I'm still trying to understand that.
Marketing.
Why is everyone called a friend?
Yeah. Well, I will also say this. This is interesting.
But on LinkedIn, it's called connections.
Again,
and on Instagram, it's called followers.
So it goes as to the emphasis that, or the vibe that each of them are trying to create. Friends on Facebook, they are trying to create a familial, or at least a sense that there's something deeper than just some superficial following. LinkedIn is a professional network, so it makes sense that they would call them something a little bit more neutral, like a connection. Instagram, I guess, is it any wonder that people seek fame on Instagram if their people are called followers? I will be candid with you. The psychological power of the word friends. I used to co-own a printing company. Our motto was print, make friends, repeat.
What does that mean?
Well, we got a lot of positive feedback from that, and we made sure that our branding reflected friendship. I would tell people, you're friends with us. You're our friend. You're part of our group of friends. And we would call them friends, all that sort of stuff. Have I kept in touch with any of my friends the minute I walked out the door of that place? No. Some of them, yes. But some of them, I see them on the street and be like, who are you? It goes as, and I'm sure they would say, who are you to me? It goes as to the flexibility of language, or how language can be, that is particularly emotionally laden, can be used to, in my opinion, manipulate the people that are on the receiving end of that, even if they know it's not true. I got to know Richard Cook because he was a client of that company that I worked for. He knew our motto was print, make friends, and repeat. He came by the shop, and over time, because of the approach that we took to our client relationships, as well as Richard being the person he is, he and I stayed in touch, and we did become friends. But I think that was an outgrowth of the feeling state that happened, irrespective of what words we actually use in our marketing. Although maybe our marketing affected this. Maybe by having branding that was tied to the idea of friendship, we as an organization set ourselves up to be open to friendships with people, because we wanted to live up to the words that were coming out of our mouths.
Now, what do you think about the concept? I think it might have been Richard that brought this up, but something that I've heard however long ago is that you can't be friends with your therapist. What are your thoughts on that? Why is that like a societal norm or an expectation? As in, like, you can't get too close with your therapist, but you really do. Like, you,
but they don't share with you. They shouldn't be.
Right.
And also the boundaries between friendships. I would imagine that that in the therapeutic relationship, I'm not a therapist, so I don't know.
Right.
But I would imagine that in the therapeutic relationship, two things happen. First of all, there may be folks that come in with issues that include lack of clarity around boundaries. And that lack of clarity around developing those boundaries, I would imagine, would be something that is within the therapist's range of responsibility, so that those individuals can function more carefully in society. And if that is anything that's approaching a situation that is endemic within the community of folks that are seeking therapy, then a therapist, I would imagine, would want to err on the side of caution and not broach that anywhere. Number one. But then number two, the other thing that I question is whether in the case of a therapist, because of the fact that the person is almost by nature of the fact that they're seeking therapy, going into the relationship from a place of extreme vulnerability, and the therapist is trained in, to some extent, I would imagine, at a very minimum, how to deal with personality or mental health challenges, at a maximum, how to manipulate the human mind to lead to certain outcomes, then there's this grave power dynamic differential that the boundary between friendship that a therapist and a client would have would be a necessity in order to avoid the abuse of those of that power differential.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jessica said something: when someone is really honest and vulnerable, as DJ was earlier, I will take the time to throw that out here, which is a statement Jessica made about both of us.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. As I said to DJ, when someone is honest like this, that is a sign of supreme confidence. It's a sign of courage. And at least with me, it opens up my heart so much that it creates such a connection that it's hard to pull away. Jessica, and I know, and you missed the earlier part of the conversation. Oleg and I were talking about the inception of our own friendship. We knew that we were friends the first time we spoke. And I felt that way with you. There's something so sincere, honest, fearless in your own vulnerability about you. But also we could just talk for hours. So understand that that's reciprocated. We have worked together. Oleg and I work together. And we are friends. So to some extent, we have clouded a boundary, or perhaps we've just drawn one and we subconsciously know what it looks like.
Yeah. I also think that, Jessica brings up a really good point around this whole concept of expectations. And that's, I think maybe to a degree, as I was saying earlier, like, it's okay to have certain expectations and assumptions for me. The difference is, am I willing to communicate them to you as a friend? So, for example, if frequency is important to me, it's one thing for me to accept it and assume that you want the same thing that I want as far as that form of frequency goes. But if I don't communicate that to you, how could you ever know? How could you ever know that what I want out of a friendship is what you want out of a friendship? And that, I think, goes back to the honesty and transparency. But it's a really good point, though. How do you communicate that in online space, to begin with? And like, how do you, because I face the same thing. I don't know if you face the same thing, Scott or Susan or Caleb or Kenny and anyone else that's on here right now. But especially in some of these quote unquote connections that I make, whether it's through LinkedIn, Facebook, or what other format, I do acknowledge the fact that some of them are purely transactional, or some of them are purely to meet a particular goal or whatever it is, and that's it. That's all they will ever be. I think Casey was talking to us recently about this, where he said that not everyone is meant to be within your life for a lifetime. Like some of the people that you meet on vacation or wherever, the reason why you didn't get their number is maybe because you were just meant to meet them there, then and there, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of truth within that. No, there's also a lot of just unknown. Like maybe I was meant to be best friends with that person, and I didn't take the opportunity to do so. To grab their contact, to initiate that relationship, to do whatever.
Mm.
And I don't know if there's ever a way of knowing it, but I think the whole concept that the whole reason, season, and a lifetime, I think it's a real thing. And I think online and in person, it happens a lot. In my life, it happens a lot.
Do you think, I'm going to go back to an earlier point in the conversation.
Sure.
We talked about friendships being things that we move away from if they no longer serve us.
Right.
So what about people that you just say friends without a legacy? Do you feel, for instance, let's say that tomorrow you suddenly make a business decision that gets you a massive rapid windfall that puts you in the 1% of income earners and probably will for the rest of your life. And you are suddenly surrounded by people who are dealing at business and in social circles and in cultural circles and events, things like that, at a level that no one in your current life, including me, could ever dream about touching.
So this is happening to me tomorrow.
It's happening to you tomorrow.
All right, I'll see you later.
Yeah. You answered my question. To what extent are you able to be a friend with anyone, or are you a friend to anyone if you leave people behind? Or do you believe in leaving people behind once you've moved, quote unquote, beyond where they serve you? Let's say it's that girl you met in 7th grade who was quiet and geeky and was so sweet and had you over her house when no one else would talk to you.
Yeah.
But she didn't have confidence, so she never made anything of herself. And now you're hanging out. You're hanging out with Drake and Rihanna.
So I'll be completely honest with this, as I always have been. And I'm not just saying that because I was dishonest, but I think there's. I was just having a conversation like this earlier today, and I told this to one of my friends. And that's just a simple truth about who I am. And that is, I wholeheartedly know that I have what it takes to achieve the dreams that I envision. When I think about the it factor, and I'm not saying this as a comparison or I'm better than anyone or worse, I'm just expressing what I believe I know about myself. And that's understanding.
Laughing at Jessica's remark.
Yeah.
That was funny.
It's understanding that my it factor, but it's also understanding that there will become a time where I will transition into different layers, different levels of who I am, financially, all these other areas. For me, what I'm choosing to acknowledge and understand about the person that I am today is that the people who have had an impact in my life will most likely remain the people that I'm connected with for the rest of my life. So once I get to a certain financial status, it's not that I'm going to stop speaking to Jessica or you or Casey or Paul or anyone.
Those of us in the Poe house?
I'm still.
Thank you, Oleg.
I really do mean that. Like, I'm still going to keep in touch with all the people that I know who have had an impact in my life. Now, am I going to drop everyone else? No. But am I going to approach it through the lens of, are certain relationships still serving me and am I serving them? I think that's an important I think that's an important question to ask.
If you're mega rich, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
If I'm in a toxic relationship, I think it's an important question for me to ask is this relationship truly serving me? And I think it's an important action for me to take to not be part of a relationship in knowing that the impact it has on my life. So I think to a degree, yes, there are certain relationships I do outgrow, and there are certain relationships that I have to be able to say no to.
As usual, Jessica has an interesting remark. Richard Cook, thank you so much for coming in tonight. It's always good to see you. You bring such a unique lens to the conversation. Oh, I'm sounding like Oleg here. Lens. I never used that word before. Oleg? Transformational relationships. Gee whiz. Is it possible to serve each other differently?
Probably.
Yeah.
But I think that goes back
shines my shoes.
But that goes back to the earlier conversation that we were having, right? And that's understanding how you serve each other in a particular friendship. So like if you send me something, if you send me your most recent accomplishment, and you know that I don't respond to one's accomplishments with a certain set of words, why would you expect that from me? Or if I do something for you, but I don't expect anything, like if I make an introduction for you, and I genuinely, and you know me, like I don't expect an introduction back. So don't do that. Don't feel like you have to give me an introduction back because I'm giving one for you. So that I think goes back to understanding the role that one has in a particular friendship or in a particular relationship. And that goes back to the value. Understanding what is the value that you provide. Like I provide different value in our friendship than the value that you provide.
Mm-hmm. Susan throws a wrinkle in this. And actually, Susan, you raised this earlier with regards to the nature of the psychotherapist relationship with the client, which is money also plays into all of this stuff. Money, on the one hand, I read a book on economics that defined what money was. And I realized when I was reading that, I had never really thought about what money was.
Like psychologically speaking?
Psychologically. The point of this article was that the physical thing, money, actually, first of all, if we were to think of money as that, we all know that that's not true. Because we consider money that is purely electronic and has no physical form at all, that's purely hypothetical, we consider it to be real money.
Right.
And so the physical stuff is purely a hard symbol of this idea. And one of the many points about what money was it was a socially constructed, mutually agreed upon measure of the value of a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Susan's point to me is interesting because it's saying, without you really saying it, Susan, that the existence of money, which signifies the existence of a transaction, inherently means or has an impact on a relationship, moving it from the transformational to the transactional, or potentially, if the money stops flowing, from the transactional to the transformational, if that relationship continues. Thoughts?
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why I don't choose to go into business with some of my closest friends, because I know that it will change the friendship. Once there is a dollar amount that is associated with a service that is performed in return, it changes the friendship because it adds an additional layer to that particular component. So for example, if you were to provide a service for me, so if you were to do speaking or marketing or whatever it is, and I pay for that service, I'm paying for the service. I'm not paying for the connection that you and I have anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where, like, I'll give you another example. I've recently started to look at some properties in the Michigan area. And I have a really good friend of mine who's a realtor in the area, and I'm sure he would do an exceptional job at it. But I'm approaching it through the lens of maybe not approaching him because I know it might change the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example. If I were to set up a contract between the two of us where I give him money to purchase a property, to manage a property, and let's say he misses a deadline. So he misses a deadline, whether it's, I don't know, tenants paying or some sort of piece of paperwork, and the deal doesn't go through. So that has other implications now.
Mm-hmm.
That has other consequences that both of us are going to have to deal with. And that's where I think that friendship takes a different form. Now I understand the whole concept behind, and I can't say it's true across the board as far as don't go business with your friends or, significant others, because I've seen situations where those work tremendously well, but that goes back to the boundaries. That goes to them being able to identify clear enough boundaries, just like you and I have boundaries.
Yeah.
You and I have boundaries in a friendship. You and I have boundaries when it comes to being able to facilitate this space.
Yeah.
You do this, I do that. Now we ask each other for feedback in the areas that we do, but we don't overstep. I don't go to you and say, hey, Scott, you need to do that better. Or I don't do your work for you.
Yeah.
Just like you don't do your work for me.
Yeah.
So I think understanding that boundary is key, but I think it would be a different story if we were paying for the service. I think that and what I mean by what the difference would be is the expectation would be so much higher and it would be different.
Susan says more marriages end over money than love.
I haven't been married, so I can't really speak to that statement, but there's probably truth.
Sadly,
I wonder why.
is.
Why? Is it greed?
Probably because, or maybe the boundaries. One of the things that I did read that was interesting is that couples that meet and get married later in life because they have built up their own assets and have their own financial arrangements, credit cards and bank accounts and cars and all those sorts of things, tend to be more conservative about intermingling money. And that was definitely true. I met my husband when I was 31, I think, 31 or 32. He was a couple of days older. And we were very clear to this day, after 23 years, I don't think we maybe have a couple $1,000s, a nominal amount in some joint accounts, but really all of our assets, liquid and cash, are ours. And we have each other as beneficiaries, but I don't go dipping into his stuff. He could hide stuff from me all he wants. It's his. That's the position I have. And I'll hide stuff from him all I want to because it's mine. We've never even had the pretense that we're sharing anything that way. And so all of this drama around you are taking money from me or you're spending it somewhere. He doesn't care how I spend my money. It's my money. I don't care how he spends. The only boundary really, or the only thing that we've had discussions about is just our mutual agreement that we both are self-sufficient. But we figured out early on in our relationship that we were both self-sufficient. So we tended to, once that had been established, it's been no surprise that we've continued to be self-sufficient. And I believe that, and barring something that were to be so debilitating, one or the other of us would not be able to be self-sufficient, like there was brain damage or a severe catastrophic event. It's hard for me to imagine money really being the breaking point issue of our relationship. But people who have softer boundaries or who maybe were married much younger are not in the same situation, I would imagine, especially if you are very young, you're married when you're 16 or 18, and maybe you are, in addition to that, idealistic and you want to share your lives together, and you do that as a way of showing trust or whatever through sharing finances.
Would you ever become someone's friend due to the amount of money they have?
No, that honestly has never occurred to me. That's gross. Ooh. Who are these people?
I asked because I think I've only read. I personally haven't experienced things like that, but like celebrities, for example.
Yeah.
Not even celebrities, but people who have a lot of money. Actually, I gotta take it that back. I know of some people personally that have had people become their friends due to the status that they had, due to being able to afford a Tesla, a mansion, a pool, so I think there is interesting thing that I don't know what happens once you have that level of money and how that changes the friendships, and to a degree I also don't know how much you can prepare for it.
Yeah, I'll tell y'all, when you're waving up at me standing on the balcony, I will say I self-define as someone who is, you've heard it before, Oleg, a resilient super soldier. Excuse me, tough as nails. And especially in that respect, or when it comes to survival and that sort of stuff, and along with that, self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And so the idea of being friends with someone just for money would actually go against my core self-definition. I would have to recreate a completely different identity as to who Scott Mason is. Because to me, that sort of person is someone who is not self-sufficient, who needs money so badly that they can't survive without inventing a relationship that they don't need. It's a pathetic version of Scott Mason that I hope to never have walked this earth. And if that person suddenly crawls out of some rock somewhere, I have a feeling my husband would detect it very quickly, and I'd probably be served with divorce papers fast. And then I wouldn't be able to eat the good food that he cooks for me. And then my life is really ruined. Can't expect that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Until we can't judge until you get to that point. Yeah. I mean,
Susan says she's got to go. It is that time anyway, Susan. It's been great to have you. Jessica, Caleb, whose friendships are authentic. Kenny, who savors the flavor. Richard, you're not here anymore, and some of the other folks that were here earlier. It was great having y'all. This was a special conversation tonight. Thank you. So, Oleg, you were on fire. You're burning me up with all this friendship. Do you have anything to say before we shut off? Maybe talk to us a little bit about your shows and about Overcoming Odds so we know who you are.
So
and yes, tomorrow, Susan and Caleb, please do link. You really do.
Tomorrow we'll be hosting a virtual event through LinkedIn and Facebook, part of our Survive to Thrive Attitude of Gratitude series, which is happening every Friday at 11:45 a.m. Eastern time.
Yep.
So tomorrow it's going to be you and I, Casey Berman, and Steve Gamlin.
Yep.
Actually, is going to be joining us, and I think the topic is, what is the it factor, and what does it mean to have it, and do some have it, others don't, or does everyone have it in their own shape or form? So that will be through LinkedIn and Facebook. For anyone that's tuning in, feel free to join in similar format to this. Whatever questions you might have, whatever perspectives, we always welcome those, because I think that it's just the four of us starting the conversation, but what makes the conversation rich is everyone that chooses to contribute and be a part of it.
Jessica just endorsed Steve. Caleb wants to connect with Jessica. DJ, you were in the mix. I forgot to thank you for some incredible contributions earlier. Everyone's talking to everybody. Kenny, we're talking about friends tonight. Y'all just be friends. Overcoming Odds podcast and the Power of Your Voice podcast. What are those mysterious things?
So Overcoming Odds is a platform for similar conversations like this. And what it's meant to do is really demonstrate one's strengths and uniqueness to the world. And I think how we do that is by capturing similar conversations like this, where people are able to freely express who they are what they know, and even what they don't know. Power of Your Stories, this next one that I launched recently, it captures a lot more of the narrative and the impact of one's narrative and how it can actually impact the trajectory of life moving forward. So those are weekly shows that I host through my platforms. But Scott, I know that you have a show of your own that focuses on a similar thing when it comes to Purpose Highway, right?
You got it. Scott Mason's Purpose Highway podcast, purposehighway.com. We're well into our first season, sharing stories of people who have connected to their higher purpose to build a better self and a better world. Entrepreneurs, influencers, great thinkers like Oleg, who have talked and shared their stories. We have some exciting guests coming up. We have a former Project Runway winner on the upcoming list. We have the CEO of the top victim services nonprofit in the world coming up as a guest. These folks are changing the world, and they will inspire you. I'm also going to be involved in something else very soon, but we're keeping that under wraps for now. But I'll let you know when it happens. I like to tease a little bit. Yes. Now, I will turn over, now that I've said my little tease and my little self-promo plug here, and plug something else besides me. And that is Overcoming Odds Today. That is Oleg's nonprofit that is about sharing these stories. And I always say to folks, go to it, overcomingodds.today. Donate some money, because what it's about is giving people a chance who might have been left on the outside or who might not have had their voice shared in this world, an opportunity to share those voices. And there's nothing more powerful than the things you all have done today in the chat box, which is share your voice. Also, please, 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 I'll raise my hand and beg. I'll do it without shame. Leave us a review on Facebook and LinkedIn if you like the show, and subscribe. We love y'all. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Oleg, you want to have the last word tonight?
No, I think you've covered everything. I think I'm just grateful that people were able to come to be a part of it, and just to share perspectives in a way that don't necessarily agree with everything that we had to say, but also challenge us in certain ways and help us see differently. And I think that's the beauty of this space, is having an open and honest and transparent conversation where other people can bring in their own insights and help us see differently. I think that's really the beauty of it all.
That's what friends are for.